Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a time of smoke-blackened beams, clattering wooden shoes, and livestock that share your bedroom. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where life is short, damp, and honestly, you probably won't survive this, especially if you're born a girl. You take your first breath in a one-room hut, its thatched roof leaking gently onto your face. It's chilly, always chilly, and the only heating is the family pig pressed up against your straw pallet. The fire in the centre of the room crackles, more smoke than flame, because good dry wood is for rich people, and you are definitely not one of those. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first year is mostly a waiting game. Will you survive the winter? Will the milkmaid remember to feed you? The truth is, infants drop like flies, especially girls. There's not much incentive to invest in you when you're not expected to carry on the family name or work the plough. Your crib, a drawer, your clothes, hand-me-downs from your older brother, complete with holes patched by string and hope. The smell in your home is a heady mix of sweat, stale ale, dung, and turnips. The four horsemen of medieval domestic life. Your parents, if they even use that word, don't coo over you. There's work to do. Your mother is probably already back in the fields or scraping crusty pots, while your father mends a fence using more curses than nails. Childcare mostly consists of keeping you from crawling into the hearth or being pecked by the chickens that wander freely indoors. By age 3, you're already helping out, toddling after your mother, clutching a jug almost as big as your head. You drop it, of course. It shatters. You cry. She sighs, picks up the largest piece, and mutters about how many jugs a child can ruin before she learns. And here's the kicker. Your community, tiny as it is, doesn't expect much from you beyond survival. If you're lucky, you'll live to see your 20s. If you're really lucky, you won't lose all your teeth by 18. Historians still argue whether infant mortality rates were as high as some sources claim. But let's just say medieval babies didn't get baby showers. They got last rites. Outside, the streets, or more accurately, the muddy trenches, are lined with waste. Chamber pots are emptied from windows, and walking anywhere is a squelching, splashy affair. The word sidewalk hasn't been invented, and shoes are mostly optional. Still, your world has its moments. On festival days, ribbons go up, and there might even be music played on goatskin drums and cracked lutes. The smells are still terrible, but at least they're festive smells. Roasting meats, bad wine, sweat with a hint of flowers. You chase after older children, who occasionally let you join in their games, tag, clapping songs, or the ever-popular who can hit the rat with a stick. Meanwhile, life inside the home never stops grinding. Literally. Your mother grinds grain between 2 stones every morning, her hands calloused and her eyes permanently squinting from the smoke. You sit nearby, pretending to help while absorbing every detail, how to knead dough, twist wool, stir gruel without scorching it. A mainstream historical fact here. Most peasant women in medieval Europe worked longer hours than their husbands. Between agriculture, housework and child-rearing, they were the original multitaskers, minus the coffee breaks. But don't mistake this for empowerment. It's not lean in, it's lean over the trough, and hope the porridge doesn't boil over again. As the years inch by, your little body adjusts to the diet. Mostly rye bread, cabbage, onions, and anything that didn't crawl away. Quirky side note, some medieval parents believed stale ale was safer than water for toddlers, so yes, you might be drunk before you're 4. Cheers. By now, your siblings have probably started dying off from things with names like bloody flux or bone fever. No one explains these illnesses. People just start whispering and looking away. When someone dies, the mourning lasts about as long as it takes to sew them into a sack and dig a shallow grave. Your own health is a gamble. You get sick often, recover sometimes, and are always itchy. Lice are part of the family, fleas your constant companions. You scratch, they bite, and life marches on. There's no school for you, of course. Girls don't need letters. They need strong backs, nimble fingers, and the ability to keep quiet. If your village has a priest who teaches the boys their Latin prayers, you might sneak a peek from the window, but mostly you learn through watching. Your mother mending a torn tunic, your grandmother plucking a chicken while telling stories of a queen who once bathed in milk. That part might be made up. Historians still argue whether medieval queens actually had milk baths, or if that's just a fancy lie passed down by envious peasants. You don't know how different things could be. All you know is what you see: the daily struggle to feed mouths, the never-ending dirt, the rhythm of bells from the church tower, calling you to prayer, to chores, to the market where you might trade a sack of onions for a cracked comb. Your name is whispered with half love and half resignation. You're a girl. That means your time in this world has a very specific shape, a brief window of childish freedom before the work, the marriage, and the dangers set in. But for now, you chase chickens and try to count stars at night, even if the sky is often too cloudy to see them. You're 5 years old, and no one is particularly thrilled about it. There's no cake, no candles, no embarrassing singing, just another morning where you're expected to stir the porridge while your mother nurses your newest sibling, and your father sharpens a scythe that's older than your entire family. You're a girl, and in the Middle Ages that doesn't come with perks. In fact, it's closer to being a lifelong penalty. When you were born, no one cheered. There were no celebrations, no carved spoons or decorative swaddling. If anything, your father might have muttered something like, "Another mouth but not a strong back." Ouch. Naming you wasn't exactly a creative act either. Maybe you're called Agnes or Matilda, because that's what her grandmother was called, and your parents were tired. Or worse, they named you something like Pernell after the mule, which honestly might be flattering compared to how they treat you. Boys get more attention, more food, and more hope pinned to them. After all, they might grow up to inherit land, run the farm, or avoid dying in a war. Girls, you're more like practice. A temporary guest in your own household, destined to become someone else's problem as soon as your body says go. Historians still argue whether medieval families truly valued daughters less, or if it was just a byproduct of economic desperation. Either way, affection isn't a given. You learn to stay quiet, to make yourself small. Your mother rarely makes eye contact unless you've dropped something, and your father only notices you when you're in his way. But you're clever. You learn to slip in and out of sight like a little house ghost, fetching this, stirring that, memorizing adult routines with the precision of a spy. On market day, you follow your mother into town, watching her haggle over eggs with the same intensity of a knight negotiating a truce. She doesn't smile much, but when she does, usually when someone finally gives her a fair deal, it feels like spring breaking through an endless frost. Still, people glance at you and sigh. "Shame she's not a boy," someone whispers, as you carry a pail of milk nearly your own size. You almost respond, but what's the point? You've heard it before, you'll hear it again. By the time you're 6, you've developed what you might call functional invisibility. You can dodge flying poultry, predict when a bucket's about to spill, and preemptively remove splinters before they fester. Your tiny fingers are useful for untangling wool, and you've learned to look busy even when you're dead tired. And then one day your mother sits you down, brushes your hair, and says the strangest thing. It's time you learn to carry yourself properly. You're confused. Are you not already carrying wood, water, shame, and the weight of unmet expectations? But no, she means your posture, your manners, the delicate balance of being seen just enough to be marketable, but not enough to be inconvenient. Because soon people will start looking, not at your face, but your waist, your walk, your dowry prospects. You don't know what a dowry is yet. You think it's something that lives in the barn. There's a local superstition, a quirky little belief, that if a girl walks backward around a yew tree while holding a bundle of rosemary, she'll be blessed with a husband who has all his teeth. That's the kind of romantic optimism you're surrounded by. You start noticing how other girls act. The older ones move slower, speak softer, and keep their heads down. The moment a girl shows signs of ripening, she vanishes from the carefree chaos of childhood. Suddenly she's churning butter in silence, eyes flicking nervously whenever men pass by. It starts to dawn on you. Being a girl in the Middle Ages isn't about becoming someone, it's about becoming useful to someone else. Marriage isn't a dream, it's the finish line for a race you never agreed to run. At home, your parents begin making strange comments. The blacksmith's wife has no daughters. The cooper needs someone who can handle bees. These are not casual observations, these are audition notes. Historians still argue whether these premarital arrangements were driven more by love, economics, or sheer convenience. Spoiler, it was mostly goats and grain. And then comes the moment you lose your last baby tooth, maybe one of the few, Normal childhood milestones you'll actually hit. It falls out into a basin of rinse water, and your grandmother cackles. Now you're ready to chew your fate. You have no idea what that means, but it doesn't sound great. That same week, your friend Ellen disappears, not in a dramatic way. One day she's there playing duck in the barrel with you. The next she's gone, replaced by whispered gossip and a basket of eggs delivered to her family's doorstep. Rumour has it she's been sent to live with a baker 3 villages over, part servant, part future bride. Your mother doesn't mention it, but you notice how she double knots your bonnet before sending you out now. You catch her eyeing your legs, your ankles, your shape, as if dreading the day someone else starts eyeing them too. Even your clothes are shifting. No more loose smocks and flower crowns. Now you wear heavier, scratchier garments with tight sleeves and laced bodices that make it impossible to run properly. Which is fine. No one expects you to run anymore, only to wait. And so you wait, on stools, at hearths, by the well. You're waiting to become a woman, though no one explains what that means except that it involves bleeding and bread making. At night, you curl up beside your siblings, the fire's warmth long faded. Your thoughts wander. Will you be like your mother, hard and quiet? Will you laugh like your grandmother, who talks to shadows and wears garlic on a string? Maybe you'll find a way out. Maybe you'll marry someone kind, or join a convent, or just run far enough that no one can find you, but probably not. By the time you're 7, the village has stopped seeing you as a child. You're not Little Meg anymore. You're that girl from the miller's house, and that title comes with expectations. Your hands should always be busy, your eyes should always be down, and your future, it's being quietly bartered in whispers behind wooden doors. You overhear your mother talking to a neighbour, casually suggesting that your weaving is improving. That might sound like a compliment, but you know what it really means. She's advertising. You're being sized up not for your personality or dreams, because those don't matter, but for your dowry potential, your hips, and your butter-churning skills. Historians still argue whether peasant girls had much say in their marital futures, but let's just say no one's asking you what you want. Marriage negotiations don't look like fairy tales. There are no candlelit proposals or soft declarations of love. It's more likely to start with something like, "Your girl looks sturdy. Can she work sheep?" And just like that, the path of your entire life begins to solidify around someone else's ambition and your ability to not complain too loudly. Let's pause for a fun tidbit. In some regions, a potential groom might give a girl a gift of bacon to show interest. If she accepts, that's basically an engagement. So, yeah, your destiny could hinge on whether you like salted meat. By now, you've noticed that the older girls vanish one by one. Some go to help distant relatives. Others are sent to noble households to serve as maids or nursemaids, which is code for future wife if no one else comes along. You, meanwhile, are kept close, for now. Your mother begins teaching you the useful things. You learn to repair a hem using thread spun from flax you prepared yourself. You learn to tell when milk is close to spoiling, how to knead dough without overworking it, and how to avoid gossiping with neighbours who smell like fermented onions and trouble. You also start learning silence. Real silence. The kind that presses down on your tongue like a heavy stone when older men start looking at you too long. You learn to slip away, to tuck your shoulders in, to pretend you didn't hear the joke they made about your ankles. Every part of your day is a tiny apprenticeship in survival. You watch your mother barter half a chicken for a sack of barley. You watch her scrape mould off cheese and declare it fine. You watch her carry grief in her eyes when she looks at your younger sibling. Too sick, too small, and already halfway to the grave. Mainstream historical fact time. By age 7 or 8, many girls were already expected to take on full adult responsibilities, especially in poorer households. Childhood, as we think of it today, simply wasn't a concept. If you could walk and talk, you could work. That reality shapes your days. You wake at dawn to fetch water before the sun turns the path into thick, slurping mud. You help gather kindling, gut fish, and keep the smaller children from licking beeswax again. By midday, your hands are cracked from soap made of ash and lard, and your back aches from lifting more than your weight in turnips. But there's one thing you're really expected to learn: obedience. Because what good is a wife who talks back? At night, while your siblings snore, you lie awake wondering what your match will be like. You've seen them. boys who barely wash, who throw rocks at dogs, who pick their teeth with chicken bones. Maybe one of them will be yours. Lucky you. Still, there's a strange kind of beauty to your world. The sun through the smoke hole, the smell of warm bread, the sound of distant bells drifting over the fields. You find moments to breathe, even laugh. You and the neighbour girl reenact saints' stories with sticks and cloaks, pretending you're martyrs instead of future housewives. There's even a story passed around the village about a girl who ran away to the forest and lived with wolves. You don't believe it, but you repeat it to yourself anyway, because even a false escape is better than none. Your mother starts dropping subtle warnings. Don't wander alone. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't smile too much. You're being prepared, not for love, not for joy, but for negotiation. You are a piece on someone else's chessboard. One day your father returns from a neighbouring village with a new scythe and a new idea. The tanner's boy is almost of age, he says. Strong arms, bit slow, but he has a cow. You look at your mother. She doesn't smile, doesn't frown, just nods. A cow is a cow. Later she hands you a basket of eggs and sends you to the tanner's house. You're not told why, but you know. The boy answers the door, red-faced and barely able to look you in the eye. You both mumble awkward greetings. Behind you the chickens cluck like judges. Back at home, nothing is said. But the air is heavier now, and your best tunic is laid out more often. Historians still argue whether medieval girls understood they were being matched up at this age, or if they simply accepted what happened next as a natural progression. But you feel the shift. You sense the closing walls. The waiting is over. You're a girl, and your time is almost up. The first thing you learn to do well, really well, is thread a needle. Your mother places the rough cloth in front of you, hands you a length of scratchy homespun thread, and waits. You fumble, you squint, you curse under your breath. She doesn't help you. She just watches. Eventually the thread goes through the needle's eye, and she nods, satisfied, as if you've passed a test that matters more than reading or prayer. Because it does matter more. If you can't sew, patch, spin, or mend, then you're not a woman. Not a useful one, anyway. You're a burden. And burdens don't last long in this world. You spend hours cross-legged by the hearth, sewing tunics with holes in the armpits, hemming linen under things, or reinforcing worn-out shoes with whatever scraps can be spared. You learn quickly that the thread shouldn't be too tight. It'll pucker the fabric. Too loose, and it falls apart. There's a rhythm to it, like breathing. In, out, pull, snip. Outside, your brothers learn to swing axes and chase pigs. Inside, you learn to transform a pile of flax into something someone might call clothing, or at least warmth. There's no applause, just more cloth to fix. Your days stretch out like spun wool, long, thin and tangled. After stitching comes spinning, twisting fibres into usable thread using a spindle and distaff. Your fingers grow stiff. You get splinters. You bleed onto the fibres sometimes, but your mother just shrugs. It blends, she says. Mainstream historical fact. Textile work dominated the lives of medieval women. In many households, spinning, weaving and mending consumed more hours than cooking or childcare. Cloth didn't come from shops. It came from you, or it didn't come at all. There's a saying in your village, a woman's worth is in her warp and weft, which is a nice way of saying, if you can't keep people warm and clothed, you're not worth feeding. Quirky little detail. Some girls were taught to stitch tiny charms into the hems of garments, bits of thread tied in sacred knots or sewn into symbols to ward off sickness or spirits. You try it once, but your mother notices and slaps your hand. We don't waste thread on ghosts, she mutters. You also learn to make cheese, and not the fun kind with soft crackers and rosemary sprigs. This is raw milk, rennet cut from a calf's stomach, and hours of slow, sour curdling. You stir and strain and press with heavy stones, trying to keep flies out of the mix. Sometimes you fail. People still eat it anyway. And butter. Don't even get started on butter. Churning is a full-body ordeal. You grip the handle, pump up and down like a human piston, sweat pouring down your back while the container sloshes and gurgles like a groaning stomach. When the butter finally appears, soft, yellow, precious, it's whisked away to the Lord's household or the market stall. You might get to lick the paddle if you're lucky. You know now that everything you do is training. Not education, not expression, just training. How well can you work? How well can you serve? Will your hands make cloth? Will your hands keep a family alive? Historians still argue whether this constant, grueling preparation gave women more control over household economics, or just tied them more tightly to the grindstone. Either way, your muscles ache, your fingers cramp, and no one thanks you. One day, a merchant woman passes through the village. She's older, sharp-eyed, wrapped in furs, and clearly someone with coin. She stops to ask your mother about wool prices. Then she glances at you. "Good hands," she mutters. "Shame she's not born in town." Your mother doesn't answer, but later you notice she looks at you a bit differently, measuring, calculating. Maybe, just maybe, you won't always be stuck here. But you don't get your hopes up. After all, you're also learning how to kill chickens. You cry the first time. The chicken doesn't. It just flaps once, then falls limp. Your hands shake. The blood is warm, stickier than you expected. Your grandmother watches, unimpressed. "You'll need a stronger stomach if you ever want a stew," she says. "You're not just making clothes, you're making food, fire, shelter, life. You soak grains in water to soften them into mash. You mash roots into paste. You sweep ashes out of the oven, knowing full well you might burn your eyebrows off next time you lean too close. It's not glamorous. It's not romantic. But without you, nothing in the house functions. And still, somehow, you're told you don't do anything important. Every now and then, you sneak outside to breathe. You watch the clouds drift. You lie in the grass and stare at nothing, just to feel what it's like to not do something for 5 whole minutes. Your siblings call for you. A pot needs mending. The sheep wandered off again. You're pulled back into the constant rhythm. Work, feed, clean, repeat. And all the while, in the background, there's the looming fact. Someone is still out there, waiting to marry you. Someone who probably won't care that you make the softest cheese in the village or that you can sew 12 stitches in a breath. They'll want you because your family promised you, because you can work. But tonight, in the silence after the fire dies down, you press your finger to the tip of the needle and hold it there. It pricks, just a little, a tiny pain. But it's your pain. And for now, it reminds you that you're still here. You wake hungry. Again. There's always hunger, just different flavours of it. Sometimes it's a growling, gnawing thing that hollows out your belly and makes you dream of roasted apples and honey bread. Other times it's a dull ache behind your ribs, like your body is sighing for something it knows it won't get. You chew stale rye bread and pretend it's a feast. This is just how it is. Food for you is whatever hasn't gone off yet. You eat the heel of a loaf hardened to stone, cabbage boiled into mush, maybe a spoonful of porridge so thin you can see the bowl beneath it. If you're lucky, there's a bit of lard to rub on your bread. If you're really lucky, there's a lump of cheese you manage to hide behind the pickling barrel. And don't even get started on meat. Meat is a rare thing, a special thing. When it appears, it's usually gristle and tendon boiled into oblivion. Unless it's salted pork, then it's just so dry you wonder if you're chewing jerky or leather. You never get the best cuts. That's for your father or your brothers if they're strong enough to work the fields. You get scraps, crumbs, the coal drippings, and you're told to be grateful. Mainstream historical fact here. Women, especially in peasant households, were usually served food last after men and children. And, that's right, even your 6-year-old brother might get more stew than you. Age and effort mattered less than gender and who had a beard. Hunger follows you to your chores. You try not to think about food while tending the fire or hauling water, but it's always there, humming under the surface. You watch hens scratch at the dirt and wonder, just for a moment, what raw eggs taste like. You pluck wild greens near the forest's edge, hoping they won't make you sick. Sometimes they do. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants really starved as often as popular culture suggests, but the truth is, you don't need to starve to suffer. Malnutrition is its own kind of slow torture. Brittle hair, cracked lips, fingers that tremble when you lift a spoon. And when famine hits, it's a whole different level of despair. The rains don't come, or they come too hard. Crops fail, grain rots, bread prices triple. Suddenly everything is different. The air feels heavier. No one sings while they work. Even the chickens seem quieter. During famine years, entire villages shrink. People disappear into the woods and don't come back. Or worse, they do come back, changed. You learn to make famine bread, a sour, sticky mess made from groundbark, acorns or boiled nettles. It fills your stomach but leaves a strange taste that lingers in your mouth for hours. A quirky historical tidbit. In some regions, women mixed chalk or clay into bread to stretch the flour further. It didn't taste good, and definitely wasn't healthy, but it was better than nothing. Maybe. You see neighbours collapse in the fields. You see your little cousin's ribs through her skin, and still you keep moving. Because if you stop, if you fall, no one picks you up. Even feast days feel like a cruel joke. You help cook all day, stirring stews, kneading dough, roasting the one pig the village could spare, and then you get a spoonful. Maybe, after everyone else eats. Your brother burps loudly and pats his stomach. You look down at your plate and try not to scream. It's not that anyone hates you, it's just... no one's thinking about your hunger. You're a girl, a helper, a stomach to keep quiet, not to satisfy. One evening, your grandmother gives you a wink and slips you a dried plum. You almost cry. It's sweet, real sweet. You can't remember the last time something tasted like that. You hold it on your tongue as long as you can before chewing, then you lick your fingers just in case. The church preaches that fasting is holy, suffering is noble, gluttony is a sin. You look at the Lord's table, heavy with pies and meat, and wonder how he manages to stay so pious while chewing venison. Some girls dream of weddings. You dream of a whole loaf of bread you don't have to share. You try to grow, truly you do, but your body resists. Your bones ache. Your back hunches from chores, and your dresses stop fitting only because your shoulders get broader, not because you're taller. At some point your first molar falls out, and a new one grows in cracked and brown. You poke it with your tongue for days, knowing it'll never feel right. Historians still argue whether dental rot was worse for women due to malnutrition, but when you pull a bit of bone from your gum after eating, you stop caring what the scholars think. One winter, food gets really scarce. The snow comes early, hard and sharp. The root cellar's empty. The animals look nervous when you walk by. People whisper about boiling shoe leather. Your aunt dies of the fever. Everyone says it was the illness, but you saw her a week before, thin as reeds, eyes like glass. She was starving, and everyone knew it. No one says that out loud. When spring finally comes, you survive. But your hunger stays. Not just in your belly, but in your eyes, your hands. You crave more than food. You crave warmth. Wholeness. A day where you eat before anyone else and don't have to explain why. But in the Middle Ages, a girl wanting more is dangerous, so you chew your bark bread, say your prayers, and pretend you're full. You wake up bleeding. It's not much at first. Just a sticky streak on the straw mattress, a coppery scent that doesn't quite go away. You think you've been wounded in your sleep, or maybe you rolled onto a sharp rock. But then it happens again the next morning. And again. You don't tell anyone. Not right away, because something in you knows this is different. Something in you whispers, "It's started." You try to hide it, stuffing old rags between your legs, changing them quietly behind the goat shed. You walk stiffly, you wince when you sit. You pray no one notices the smell, but of course they do. Your mother finds the stained cloths and sighs, not out of concern but calculation. You've officially crossed the threshold from girl to marriageable object. Mainstream historical fact. In most medieval cultures, menstruation marked the beginning of a girl's eligibility for marriage, sometimes even the day of. There was no concept of adolescence. You were either a child or a potential wife. Nothing in between. Your mother doesn't ask how you feel. She just tells you to wash more often and not to walk with your knees apart like a fool. Charming. The local midwife drops by and eyes you like she's checking a ripening melon. She gives you a satchel of dried herbs to help steady the blood. You don't know what's in it. It tastes like dirt and mint, but you drink it anyway. There's a new discomfort in your life now, not just physical, though that's plenty bad, but social. The boys stop teasing you. They look at you instead. The older ones let their gaze linger too long. The younger ones ask questions in snickers. You are not ready. And yet, everything in your world assumes you are. Ready for marriage, ready for children, ready for death, really, because those three things are often bundled together. Quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval women wore charms made from animal teeth or bat wings during their monthly courses, believing they could reduce the pain. Others simply bit down on leather and hoped it ended quickly. You're not offered any of these charms. You're offered a choice. Keep quiet about it, or risk being labelled troubled. You choose silence. Your mother teaches you how to dispose of the cloths. Burn them if possible, bury them if not. The smell might attract spirits, or wolves, or worse, nosy neighbours, and you start to notice something. The church is suddenly very interested in your body. The priest gives a sermon about Eve's punishment, about the unclean flow of blood, and how women must remain modest, lest they tempt others into sin. You sit in the back of the cold stone chapel, clenching your jaw, wondering how bleeding once a month makes you a threat to anyone. Historians still argue whether the church's teachings about menstruation were taken literally by most people, or simply used as convenient excuses for control. Either way, you feel watched, judged, shamed. You're told, directly or indirectly, that your body now belongs to others, that your womb is a vessel, that your breasts, sore, awkward, uneven, are future milk factories, that your blood is both a curse and a duty. You dream of ripping off your bodice and running into the woods. You dream of climbing a tree and never coming down. But in the morning you're lacing your shift and pretending nothing's wrong. And then one day your father tells you to carry a jar of pickled onions to the tanner's house. Again. He doesn't have to say why. You arrive, barefoot and sullen. The tanner's boy, your intended, though no one says that out loud, is skinning something that might once have been a deer. He waves, embarrassed. You nod. The jar is heavy in your hands. "Do you like onions?" he asks. "No," you say. He shrugs. "Me neither." And just like that, you know what kind of marriage this will be. A quiet one, an awkward one, but probably not a cruel one. He seems the sort who'd rather feed pigs than hit his wife. It's a low bar, but it's something. You walk home and try to imagine what it'll be like, leaving your family, sleeping in a strange bed, bleeding onto strange sheets, bearing children that might look like this boy, who smells vaguely of wet fur. You're 13. You still like singing songs to yourself. You still sleep with a carved bit of wood shaped like a rabbit. You still don't know how babies are actually made, though you have ideas. The older women say things like, "When the time comes, you'll know." That doesn't comfort you. It sounds more like a threat. One evening, your grandmother pulls you aside and tells you a story about a girl who refused to marry. She shaved her head, dressed as a boy, and joined a monastery. They say she lived out her life copying manuscripts in peace. They say she was never found out. You ask if it's true. She just winks and says, "Some stories are worth believing, even if they're not real." You sleep with that story tucked in your mind, just in case. But the world keeps turning. Your bleeding becomes regular. You learn to track the moon. You learn to layer your skirts. You learn which herbs help and which ones make you vomit for 2 days straight. You even learn how to smile when someone compliments your childbearing hips. And somewhere deep inside, you start building a small hidden room inside yourself. A mental space no one can enter. Not your mother, not your future husband, not even the church. Just you. Because you're going to need it. You're betrothed now. Not officially, not with a ring or a feast or a dramatic announcement in the square. Just decided. Agreed upon. Sealed over pickled onions and a firm handshake. The tanner's boy and you, it's a done deal. You weren't consulted. You weren't even properly informed. One day you were you, and the next you were spoken for. Like a loaf of bread promised to someone who hasn't paid yet. You don't even know when it's happening. Could be next year. Could be next week. You try not to ask too many questions because asking makes you seem difficult. And difficult girls don't get choices. They get punishments. Your mother starts preparing your dowry. It's not much. A wool cloak, some linens you've stitched yourself, a 3-legged stool your brother carved, and a few chickens, assuming they survived the summer. You're proud of the embroidery on one cloth. Tiny flowers, curling vines. You trace them with your fingers at night, imagining that someone someday might notice. Mainstream historical fact. Most peasant marriages were practical arrangements. Economic survival more than romance. Property, livestock and alliances mattered more than feelings. Your family's goal is simple. Move you off the books and hope you don't starve. You begin making visits to the tanner's household. Casual ones at first. You help render animal fat into soap. You watch his sisters card wool. You try to avoid the back of the shed, where the skins hang like sagging ghosts. The tanner's boy, your future husband, isn't cruel, just quiet. His hair sticks out in every direction, and he smells like ash and hide. He offers you a dried apple slice one day. You accept it. You smile. It's the closest thing you've ever had to courtship. You wonder if this is what love looks like. You won't admit it, but you miss your home already. Not the work, not the hunger, but the rhythm, the predictability, the way your little sister braids your hair with clumsy fingers, the lopsided stool near the hearth, even the goat that once ate your only pair of stockings. You won't get to take any of that with you. On the day of your wedding, if it can even be called that, there's no gown, no crown of flowers. You wear your best tunic, which is still patched at the elbow. Your mother ties your hair with a ribbon you haven't worn since you were 6. Your father nods at you, says, "Don't make trouble." That's it. A priest reads some Latin words you don't understand. Bread is broken. A jug of ale is passed around. Someone sneezes during the vows. You don't cry. You just feel separate, like you're watching someone else's life play out. Quirky historical tidbit? In some rural communities, if a wedding couldn't be afforded, couples were sometimes declared married by simply agreeing to live together and referring to each other as man and wife in public. That's it. No bells, no dancing, just mutual survival. You ride to your new home on the back of a cart. There's no saddle. The road is muddy. Every bump feels like a question you forgot to ask. Your new household is strange. The air smells different. The floor creaks in unfamiliar places. You sleep on a straw mattress stuffed with a mix of feathers and fur. You lie there, staring at the rafters, listening to every sound, every breath that isn't yours. And then there's the matter of the marriage bed. No one explains what's expected, not directly. But the tension is unmistakable. You brace yourself. You do not cry. You focus on the knots in the wood beside your head. You breathe. It's over quickly. The next morning your thighs ache and there's a small patch of blood on the blanket. Someone sees it and nods approvingly. Like you've passed another test, you want to disappear. Historians still argue whether peasant women truly had no say in consummation, or whether some households allowed time, patience, even kindness. You suspect it depends entirely on the man. And you? You got lucky, sort of. Your days don't change much, except everything is new. New chores, new rules, new family dynamics to navigate without stepping on any toes, or egos. You rise before dawn to help render tallow, stir dye, scrape hides. Your hands reek of lye. Your skin burns. Your fingernails turn black from soot. No one thanks you. You've learned to be invisible, to smooth the fabric of other people's lives without creasing it. That skill serves you well here. You also learn to bite your tongue, especially when the tanner's mother critiques your stitching, or your posture, or the way you hold a knife. "She's young," someone mutters. "She'd better grow fast," someone else replies. You want to scream. But instead you go outside. You sit on the cold steps and look at the stars. You try to remember how it felt to lie in the grass and make up songs. You try to remember who you were before the onions, before the ribbon, before the priest. And you tell yourself this: you are still you, somewhere. It's strange how quickly life reshapes itself. One week you're balancing a chipped bowl of stew at your family's hearth, and the next you're expected to command an entire kitchen without dropping the bread knife. You don't feel like a wife. You feel like a child pretending in someone else's shoes, only the shoes don't fit and no one's pretending. Your mornings start with a grunt from your husband as he swings out of bed. He doesn't speak much, just nods, scratches his beard and walks outside to tend hides or scrape lye from a barrel. You lie there for another moment, staring at the smoke-darkened beams, knowing what's next. Get up, stoke the fire, sweep, pour water, knead dough, feed chickens, clean chamber pot, boil linen. And if your mother-in-law's in a bad mood, redo everything because your sweeping wasn't thorough enough. Being married isn't the happy ending it's made out to be in songs. It's just the next phase of labour. Your property now, his, not in the metaphorical way, in the legally binding way, mainstream historical fact. Under medieval law, especially in most parts of Europe, women were considered subordinate to their husbands. Their legal identity essentially merged into his. No property, no vote, no say. You were a person before marriage. Now you're a shadow. You can't even go to market without permission, or at least without explaining why. You need dried herbs, thread, more lye, but when you mention it, your husband shrugs and says, "Can't you make do?" That's the phrase now. Make do. Make it work. Make less seem like enough. You don't resent him exactly. He's not cruel, but he's tired, like everyone, and you both carry your weariness around like cloaks. The good days are when you get things right, when the soap comes out pale and smooth, or the broth actually tastes like food. On those days, you feel capable, respected even. not quite seen, but not invisible either. Then there are the bad days. Days when the lye barrel leaks, when your stew burns, when your mother-in-law tells you your womb must be cold because there's still no baby. You try not to flinch when she says it. You've only been married a few months. You barely understand your own body, let alone how to will life into existence. But already people are watching, whispering, quirky historical tidbit. Some women in the Middle Ages believed that stepping over a hair or sitting too close to a blacksmith's anvil could cause infertility. Others blame tight bodices, or too much garlic, or not enough garlic. You don't know what to believe. So you drink teas made from mugwort and pennyroyal. You sleep with a cloth doll beneath your pillow. You rub rosemary into your wrists. You pray sometimes, even though it feels like the prayers bounce off the rafters and slide down the wall. Then one morning your stomach flips at the smell of boiling cabbage. You run outside, hunch over a log and retch until your ribs ache. Someone sees. Someone always sees. By evening your mother-in-law is smiling like she's the Virgin Mary herself. Knew she wasn't barren, she tells the neighbour loudly while peeling onions. Your husband nods like he somehow had anything to do with it. You're not smiling. You're terrified. You didn't even know how to be a wife. Now you're supposed to be a mother. Historians still argue whether medieval women saw motherhood as an empowering role or simply an expected one. Either way, you don't get to choose. Your body made a decision before your mind caught up. You begin moving slower. People fuss over you for about 2 weeks. Then they return to handing you buckets, scolding your posture, reminding you to stay active so the baby doesn't get lazy. The midwife visits once. She pokes your belly, tuts, hands you a bag of herbs, and tells you to avoid moonlight. You ask why. She says, bad for the womb. You don't question it. You try to prepare. You ask your husband's sister what birth feels like. She laughs for a full minute. Then she says, like dying, but slower. You laugh too, because what else can you do? Your back starts to hurt. Your feet swell. Your clothes stop fitting and the new ones itch. You crave honey and pears, but the only fruit in the house is half a shriveled turnip. You lick it and put it back. Some nights you lie awake, one hand on your stomach, wondering if your child will have your nose, your laugh, your stubbornness, or if it will even live long enough for you to find out. Because no one says it, but everyone knows. Childbirth is a gamble. A coin toss with your life on one side and a tiny grave on the other. Your grandmother once told you that a woman giving birth has one foot in the grave and the other on a soap-slick floorboard. At the time, you thought it was a joke. Now you know better. You don't talk about it, but you think about it constantly. The awkward, tangled knot of sex and sin you've been dropped into without so much as a how-to guide. No one told you what to expect when your marriage was sealed. No one told you about the discomfort, the confusion, or the wave of shame that crept in afterward like damp under a door, and certainly no one told you that women were supposed to want it, but only in a quiet, polite, totally invisible kind of way. Because here's the rub, pun intended, you're expected to be both virtuous and available, pure and ready, the Virgin Mary by day, a fertility goddess by night, no questions allowed. You and your husband don't talk about it either. It's something that just happens like milking goats or mending tunics. You brace yourself. You breathe slowly. You try not to make a sound. Mainstream historical fact. The medieval church viewed sex as inherently sinful, even within marriage, unless it was strictly for procreation. And for women, any sign of enjoyment could be seen as evidence of moral weakness. So, great. You're sinful if you want it, suspicious if you don't. It's a lose-lose wrapped in scratchy wool sheets. The strangest part? No one even acknowledges your discomfort. When you hint about pain or confusion, your mother-in-law just shrugs. That's the price of bearing fruit, she says while chopping onions. You don't know whether to laugh or scream, and yet everyone around you has an opinion on what's appropriate. There are rules, so many rules. No lying face up on a full moon, no touching if you've eaten leeks, no intimacy on feast days, fast days, saints' days, or, just to be safe, every Wednesday. Historians still argue whether these rules were enforced, mocked, or quietly ignored. But you know this. They exist, and you're meant to follow them. So you do. You don't dare speak to other women about it, at least not directly. Instead, you exchange glances, nods, little shared silences when someone mentions bedroom matters. Sometimes, when gathering herbs or scrubbing pots together, someone might mutter, He's not cruel, but he's clumsy. And everyone will just nod, because they know. One woman, Agnes, older, widowed, unafraid, once said, "If you keep your eyes open, you can pretend it's not happening." You weren't sure whether to be horrified or impressed. There are stories, of course, whispers in the dark, about women who refused, women who ran, women who took lovers, usually ending up in rivers or prisons, or pits. You don't even think of resisting, you just endure, because you're not foolish. You know how fast a good reputation can shatter. And then there's the church. Oh, the church has thoughts. The priest preaches fire and brimstone about lust, quoting Paul and Augustine until your ears ring. A woman's desire leads men astray, he thunders. You look at your calloused hands and wonder what desire even looks like. The confessional becomes a place of theatre. You kneel. You whisper sins you don't believe are sins. You say you thought impure thoughts when really you were just trying not to think at all. The priest nods solemnly and tells you to recite prayers. You do. Because it's easier than asking questions no one wants to answer. Quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval women were prescribed cabbage water to cool the womb if they were deemed too lustful. You taste cabbage every other day. No one seems worried. You start noticing other rules. How women aren't supposed to sing too loudly, lest it stir up temptation. How showing your ankles while walking to the well earns you a whispered scolding. How smiling too much at a male merchant gets you labelled a flirt. You don't feel like a temptress. You feel like a tired girl in a too tight bodice trying to remember if you salted the stew, and yet there's this constant low thrum of being watched, judged, not just for what you do, but how you move, how you speak, whether your husband seems content or restless. Because if he's restless, they'll blame you. Historians still argue whether this sexual scrutiny served as social control or was simply a symptom of religious fervour. You suspect both. All you know is it never ends. One night, lying beside your husband, you whisper, "Do you think I'm wicked?" He turns to you, confused. "No," he says slowly. "You just worry too much." You stare at the ceiling. You want to believe him. But in a world where even pleasure is a potential sin, worrying feels like the safest form of resistance. And yet, despite it all, there are moments. Small ones. A brush of fingers while rinsing laundry. A shared laugh over a broken stool. A time when you initiate. Not out of fear, not out of duty, but just to feel something human. And it's not terrible. It's soft, brief. And for once, it belongs to you. You tuck that moment away like a hidden charm. Something no priest, no neighbour, no gossiping market woman can take from you. Because being a woman in the Middle Ages means navigating a maze of rules you didn't write, expectations you didn't agree to, and rituals no one explains until it's too late. But it also means survival, creativity, quiet defiance stitched into the seams of your silence. You're not wicked. You're just trying to live. You wake one morning to the unmistakable feeling of something shifting inside you. A tightness, a weight, a strange fullness. You don't say anything at first. You just lie there, hand resting on your belly, eyes wide in the half-light of dawn. This is it. You're pregnant. You're sure of it. Not just from the missed bleeding or the heaviness in your chest or the way your appetite has become chaotic and demanding, but from a knowing deep in your bones that you are no longer just you. Mainstream historical fact. Most medieval women spent more of their reproductive years pregnant or recovering from it than not. It was expected. It was constant. It was dangerous. You rise carefully. You move slower. You begin the day's chores with a newfound awareness of your own fragility. But no one else slows down for you. No one reduces your load of firewood. No one offers to knead the dough for you. You're pregnant, yes, but you're also still a wife. A worker. A body expected to function until it breaks. And oh, how easily it might break. The older women know. They give you tight-lipped looks, murmur half blessings, and leave sprigs of herbs on your doorstep. Yarrow, angelica, maybe some mugwort tied with coarse twine. No one says it out loud, but they're afraid. And so are you. Your husband says little. He seems proud in the stiff, awkward way of a man who doesn't quite know what to do with his hands. He pats your shoulder. He says, "Good." And then he returns to scraping hides, as if the fate of two lives hasn't just shifted forever. You're expected to carry on as normal, so you do, You clean, you cook, you throw up quietly behind the woodpile, you cry once when your dress won't fasten, you scrub harder the next day to make up for the wasted time. You've heard stories, you've seen stories. The woman 3 houses over, who laboured for 2 days before dying on a pallet of straw, the midwife who arrived too late, the baby who never cried, the husband who remarried before the season changed. You've never been told these stories directly. They're passed around in glances, in silences, in how quickly someone changes the subject when you ask too many questions. Historians still argue whether maternal mortality in the Middle Ages was as high as some records suggest. But when you live in a village with 3 gravestones for every mother, it doesn't feel like much of a debate. Pregnancy is not a celebration. It's a countdown, a quirky historical tidbit. Some women in labour were given birthing girdles, long strips of parchment or cloth marked with prayers and saints' names, to wrap around their bellies. The idea was protection, divine intervention, maybe just comfort. You don't have one. You make your own by whispering psalm fragments into the lining of your apron. The months pass, your back aches, your feet swell, your sense of smell becomes a curse. You can't stomach cabbage anymore and the tannery stench nearly knocks you flat. You keep your hands busy to silence your thoughts. You stitch tiny booties from scrap cloth, not because you know you'll need them, but because it gives your fingers something to believe in. And then come the dreams. You dream of bleeding, of screaming, of midwives shaking their heads, of your baby being born silent. You wake with a start, the sheets damp, your hand on your stomach whispering, "Not yet, not yet, not yet." When labour finally comes, it arrives not like a thunderclap, but a slow, dragging tide. It starts with a tightness in your back, then a pain that wraps around your belly like a belt of knives. You try to keep working, out of stubbornness, fear, shame, but by midday you can't stand. Someone runs for the midwife. She arrives with a satchel that smells like dried blood and rosemary. She doesn't say much. She just nods, feels your belly, mutters something about good position, and tells you to lie down. You do. And then the real pain begins. No one prepares you for how it takes over, how it owns you, how your body stops being yours and becomes a vessel for agony. You scream. Once. The midwife slaps your thigh. "Save your breath," she says. You nod. You bite your fist. You try to remember your name. Time stops meaning anything. The fire goes out. Someone opens a window. Someone closes it again. Someone brings you broth. You spill it. You see your grandmother for a moment sitting by the door, but she died 2 winters ago. You blink, and she's gone. You feel tearing. You feel burning. You feel like you are leaving your own body. And then, finally, a sound, a cry, small, angry, wet. Your child. Your child. The midwife says, "It's a girl." You nod. You don't speak. You're too tired to be disappointed. You're too grateful to be alive. They place her on your chest, sticky and warm, eyes screwed shut. She smells like blood and milk and smoke. You whisper, "Hello," and for a moment everything else disappears. Historians still argue whether childbirth created bonds between medieval women that transcended their isolation and labour. You don't care what they argue. In this moment, you feel a bond stronger than any rule or prayer. You've done it. You survived. But the bleeding doesn't stop. You notice it when the midwife frowns, when she changes the linen again, and again, and again. You don't panic. Not at first. You just feel cold, tired, like sleep is dragging you under. Someone slaps your cheek. You hear shouting. You see your husband's face, pale, stunned. You see the midwife reaching into her bag, pulling out more cloths, a carving of St. Margaret, a wooden cross. You close your eyes, and you think, if this is it, at least I held her once. You wake, barely. The world is a blur of dim light and coarse blankets. You feel the sting of fever in your limbs, the dryness in your mouth, the odd sensation of your body floating several inches below itself. You're alive, but only just. Someone is weeping nearby. You hear the creak of floorboards, the low murmur of prayers. You think you hear your name. You fade out again, and again. When you finally return for good, it's 3 days later and the midwife is gone. Your husband sits beside the bed, silent. Your baby, is swaddled tightly in someone else's arms. "She's fine," your mother-in-law says. "Quiet, good appetite. You did well." You did well. You feel hollowed out. You're told the bleeding slowed, that the fever broke, that you were lucky. Some women don't wake up at all. And though you survived, you know a part of you stayed behind on the floor of that room, a part you'll never get back. Mainstream historical fact: postpartum infection, or childbed fever, claimed the lives of countless women in the Middle Ages. With no knowledge of bacteria and almost no hygiene standards, a simple unwashed hand could mean death within days. Surviving childbirth was a victory. Surviving the recovery was something closer to a miracle. But no one around you uses words like miracle. There's too much to do. You're expected to rest, but not for long. There's laundry. There are animals to tend, a hearth to maintain, and meals to cook. The child needs to nurse, and nurse, and nurse. She latches on with surprising strength like a tiny, determined tick. You ache, your breasts throb. They crack and bleed, and you clench your jaw until your teeth hurt. There's no ointment, no relief, just linen cloths and whispered advice from older women who've done this 5, 6, 12 times. You'll toughen up, they say. You'll stop leaking everywhere. You'll sleep again someday. You nod, but the truth is you're not sure you will. The baby wails constantly unless she's latched. You barely eat. You barely sleep. You sway in place while stirring porridge, nearly falling forward from exhaustion. You forget simple words. You burn things. You cry, sometimes without knowing why, and no one asks how you're doing. Because motherhood is not about you. It's about survival. For the child, not the mother. The priest visits once. He blesses the baby. He blesses you too, but then adds a note of caution. Do not grow vain in your role. Humility is your virtue now. You stare at him, blankly. Quirky historical tidbit. Some people believed a woman's soul left her body during childbirth and hovered above her until her churching, a ritual cleansing done 40 days after birth. Until then, you were considered spiritually impure, unfit for church, suspect. You count the days until you're churching. Not because you care about the ritual, but because it's the first time someone will officially acknowledge that you're still here. In the meantime, life continues. The baby grows. She gets a name, one borrowed from your husband's grandmother. You wanted something else, something gentler, but your opinion wasn't asked. Now she bears a name as heavy as a sack of flour. You sing to her when no one's listening, quiet lullabies your mother used to hum. You make up verses about birds and bees and honey. She stares at you with wide, wet eyes, her tiny mouth moving as if to answer. For a moment you feel something you haven't in weeks. Connection. A thread tying you to this little person who doesn't know how hard the world is yet. You wonder if she'll get to be a child for longer than you did. You doubt it. Historians still argue whether medieval children were cherished or merely tolerated until they became useful. You suspect it depends on the child, and the season, and whether there's enough food. When your daughter is 6 weeks old, she gets a rash. Just a few red bumps, but you panic. You've seen how quickly things spiral. You've buried cousins smaller than she is. You try everything. Chamomile tea, ash water, a poultice of garlic and vinegar. Nothing helps. Your neighbour notices the rash and whispers, "Keep her out of the moonlight." You nod, pretending that makes sense. You're ready to try anything, and that's when the rumours start. Nothing loud, nothing obvious. Just whispers. That your baby was too quiet, that she cried too much, that she was born too small or too early or not under the right moon, that maybe, just maybe, something unnatural is involved. The word witch isn't said, but you feel it, hovering. You make a show of going to church. You bring the baby. You pray loudly. You tie a small wooden cross to her cradle. You survive the whispers, this time. But you know now, if your child dies, it will be your fault. If she thrives, it's God's blessing. Either way, the credit or the blame skips past the father like water off stone. You watch her sleep one evening, curled like a bean, her breath whistling softly through tiny nostrils. You wonder what world she'll grow into, what she'll be forced to carry, what she'll learn to hide, who she'll be given to, whether she'll survive her first birth. You touch her cheek, so soft it hardly seems real. You whisper, "I hope you get more than I did." But you already know better. There are smells you never get used to. You've grown accustomed to blood and milk and fire smoke, but some things still punch you in the nose, like the reek of rotting turnips under the floorboards, or the fermented stink that wafts from the privy after rain. You keep a sprig of mint tucked in your sleeve for emergencies. It helps. A little. And then, of course, there's you. You smell. Everyone smells. It's the medieval way. There's no shame in it, because there's no real alternative. A full body wash happens maybe once a month. If the weather's warm, the well isn't dry and your chores are miraculously light. Otherwise, you do what everyone does, spot clean with cold water and a rag, or rub yourself down with a bit of vinegar, or when you're feeling very fancy, rose water, if you can find someone willing to trade for it. Mainstream historical fact. Personal hygiene was valued in medieval Europe, but access to clean water, soap and privacy made regular washing a rare luxury. Public bathhouses once flourished in some areas, but many were shut down or frowned upon by the church for being immoral. Because, of course, everything eventually becomes immoral. You do your best. You wash your hands with lye soap that leaves them cracked and dry. You scrape dirt from your nails with a bone pin. You comb your hair daily to keep lice at bay. But the lice always win. They're just part of life. You and your neighbours talk about them like the weather. The lice are bad this week. Mine don't like the cold. One woman claims garlic in the hair helps. Another swears by goose fat. Neither works. There are moments when you long for the feel of a hot bath. So hot it steams the cold from your bones. You had one once, years ago, when you were small and sick and your mother boiled water over 3 separate fires just to lower you into a wash tub. You still remember how it felt. Like being kissed by the sun. Now, washing is a basin by the door, a rag too thin to scrub with, and a draft that turns your goosebumps to frost. You do what you can. You clean your baby more than yourself. Wipe her face with soft cloths, change her linen frequently, comb the curls at her crown. Her skin still smells sweet, warm, like bread and milk and sleep. You press your nose to her hair and breathe deep. It's the only clean thing in your life. Sometimes you envy her. Other times you worry you're already failing her. Quirky historical tidbit? Some women in wealthier households used crushed pearls or powdered horn as early versions of dry shampoo. Others dusted their underarms with dried lavender or rosemary ash to mask odour. You try this once. The lavender makes you sneeze. The ash leaves streaks under your arms. But you pretend it's working anyway. Your clothing doesn't help. It's made from heavy wool that soaks up sweat and smoke and never quite dries in winter. You wear the same few garments for weeks. When you finally wash them, you do it by hand in a wooden tub, boiling water in shifts, scrubbing until your knuckles bleed, then hanging them to dry on a rope that always sags too low. You own one underdress, maybe 2. You rotate them, patch them, whisper prayers into their seams. You've learned how to clean the dirtiest parts first in case you run out of daylight or soap. You once asked your husband what he thinks of the smell. He blinked, sniffed, and said, "It's fine." That was the end of the conversation. Men don't notice, or if they do, they pretend not to. But women know. You can smell grief, stress, even lies. You know when someone hasn't bathed in weeks, and when someone's trying to cover it with mint leaves. You learn to identify people in the dark by their scent alone. You hear whispers of nobility who perfume their bedsheets and bathe in milk. You laugh. Milk is for babies, not for vanity. And besides, you'd rather drink it. Though you wouldn't say no to a warm soak and a moment alone. Even your teeth are turning on you. One at the back throbs so badly you have to chew on one side. There's no dentist, no clove oil, no kindly healer with a silver pick. Just your husband's cousin, who once pulled a rotten tooth with a rusty nail and a pair of tongs. You consider it. You don't mention it. Historians still argue whether hygiene truly deteriorated after the fall of the Roman baths, or if it's just a modern misunderstanding of medieval routines. But you don't need a historian. You need soap, and maybe a comb that doesn't snap when you use it. Your hair is a battlefield. You braid it tightly to keep it clean, wrap it in cloth when you sleep, pick out the fleas one by one, you burn them in the fire, it becomes a ritual, one fleck at a time, your own quiet little war. Once, a travelling monk passed through the village. He had white robes, sandals, and hair so shiny it looked like a river. You stared. Everyone did. He smelled like spice and incense and something better than this place. He spoke of purity, of cleansing sins and souls. You wanted to ask if he knew how to cleanse lice, but you didn't. You just memorized his scent and carried it with you for days, and still, somehow, you endure. You stop noticing the stink most days. You catch a whiff of yourself, wrinkle your nose, and move on. You've got stew to stir, diapers to boil, firewood to gather. There's no time for modesty or shame, because in the Middle Ages, survival is the only perfume you're guaranteed, and you're still here. You're not a healer, at least no one calls you one, but every day someone knocks at your door with a cough, a rash, a burn, or something worse. You never claim to have answers. You just have what you've always had. A bundle of herbs drying near the chimney, a few old recipes carved into memory, and the ability to pay attention when the old midwife mumbled about foxglove and fennel. You learned that yarrow stops bleeding, that comfrey can knit a wound unless it's festering. That nettle makes a good tonic, but only if boiled 3 times. You know when to bury the root, when to burn it, and when to offer it with honey and hope. No one thanks you when it works, but if it doesn't, if the fever doesn't break, if the baby keeps coughing, if the dog still limps, then it's your fault, not the illness, not the season, yours. Mainstream historical fact: women in medieval villages were often the primary caregivers and informal healers. They administered herbal remedies, helped with births, treated wounds, and did it all without formal training or protection. When it worked, they were wise women. When it didn't, they were witches. You felt the shift, how quickly a neighbour's gratitude turns to suspicion. There was a day, not long ago, when you gave a poultice of ground mustard and pig fat to a boy with a fever. His mother thanked you, called you clever, praised your soft hands. Then he got worse. He died. And now she won't speak to you. She doesn't have to. Her silence spreads. Others catch it. Whispers begin. You feel them like a draught through the door. Cold, creeping, impossible to block. She spends too much time in the woods. She talks to herself. She doesn't pray loud enough. You want to scream, "I am not a witch. I am exhausted." But that's not how fear works. There's a peculiar kind of paranoia in your village. It simmers just beneath the surface. A cow dies, a child stutters, someone's bread doesn't rise. The cause can't be bad luck or bad weather. It must be someone, and women make convenient suspects, especially women who know things. You try to be careful. You stop going to the woods alone. You stop hanging herbs where others can see them. You tuck your remedies inside plain linen instead of painted jars. You lower your voice when giving instructions. You don't smile when they recover. Quirky historical tidbit. In some places, women were forbidden from gathering herbs during twilight or after the church bell rang at Vespers. Doing so was considered a sign of dabbling in unnatural arts. As if moonlight has a moral opinion. You begin hearing more rumours. A goose fell ill after eating in your yard. A neighbour's baby cries when you walk by. You lit a fire using only 1 match. Surely the devil must be helping you. You try not to laugh or cry. You just work harder, smoother, smaller. You offer your advice in passing so it sounds like a guess, not a cure. You say things like, "Might be good to add some sage to that tea," or "I knew someone once who wrapped a burn with cobwebs. Worked for her." You make your remedies sound like old wives' tales, because that's what keeps you safe. Historians still argue whether witch hunts in rural villages were driven by true belief, political power, or just old-fashioned neighbourly spite. Probably all 3, you don't care. You just want to live through the winter. But there are signs things are getting worse. The priest's sermons grow sharper. He speaks more about temptation, corruption, evil in familiar places. He never says names. He doesn't have to. Your husband starts watching you more closely. Not cruelly, just carefully. He notices when you come home with muddy hems, when you brew tea with unfamiliar leaves, when you hum to the baby while grinding dried root. One night he asks, "Where do you get these ideas?" You shrug. "From my mother." He nods, slow and uncertain. She was a good woman. You agree, she was, but that doesn't mean they thought so. You still keep your little book. It's just a scrap of parchment and charcoal marks, hidden in a pocket in the floorboards. No spells, no curses, just ratios, notes, observations, what worked, what didn't. You open it only when you're alone. It smells like dust and secrecy. You've seen what happens to women who don't stay careful. The tanner's cousin once accused her neighbour of eyeing her goat too long. A week later, that woman's home was burned to the ground. No trial, just ash and accusation. You wonder if she really did anything. Probably not. Maybe she just forgot to smile. You look at your baby, still soft, still safe. You stroke her cheek, her hair, and think, "I'll keep my head down for her." But it's a hard thing, dimming your light every day. pretending not to know the difference between healing and harm, between being wise and being dangerous. You bite your tongue so often it has calluses. You stop humming. You stop brewing. You learn to say, I don't know. Because the Middle Ages have no mercy for women who stand too tall. And you're not ready to burn. You're so tired. Not just the bone-deep kind of tired that comes from chasing a toddler while gutting fish, but the soul-weary exhaustion of knowing there's never going to be a day off. No Sabbath, no festival, no miracle snowstorm that halts the grind. Just more. You wake up to work. You eat while working. You sometimes fall asleep with a spindle still in your hand. This is your life now. Mainstream historical fact. For peasant women in the Middle Ages, the labour was relentless. Agricultural work, domestic tasks, animal care, and child-rearing all fell into their daily rhythm. There was no such thing as just a housewife. You were the backbone of the household, and the least appreciated piece of it. Your hands are hard as bark now. The skin between your thumb and forefinger is permanently rough from pulling flax. You've forgotten what it feels like to have clean fingernails for longer than half a day. You sometimes wake up with your fingers curled into fists, still mimicking the action of wringing out cloth. You want to laugh at the idea that women are the weaker sex. You want to drag every smug clergyman who says that into your kitchen, hand him a basket of laundry, a colicky child and an oven full of bread, and watch him cry before noon. But instead, you just nod politely. Because you still need blessings. You still need peace. Some mornings you're in the fields, picking stones from the furrow so the plough won't catch. Other days you're on your knees, scrubbing the same stain out of the same tunic for the third time, because someone dribbled fat all over it. Again. And then there's weaving, spinning, darning, brewing, baking, feeding the chickens, gathering kindling, churning butter until your arms shake, mopping up a child's mess while boiling root vegetables and trying not to burn the stew. You've learned to do 5 things at once, and yet you're still scolded when one stitch is crooked. Your mother-in-law grumbles that your embroidery isn't clean enough. You want to shove the needle into your own ear just to block out the sound. You get no credit when things go well. But when something breaks, burns, spoils, or disappears, everyone looks at you. Historians still argue whether women had any true authority in medieval homes, or whether they were simply the most overworked and underpraised managers in Europe. From where you're standing, it feels like both. You run the show, but no one claps at the end. You try to carve out small moments of rest, a warm spot near the hearth, a bit of honey licked from the spoon before your daughter sees, a quiet moment before anyone wakes when the world feels soft and half real. But these are brief, fragile things, easily shattered. You drop a pot and someone calls you clumsy. You take too long sweeping and someone asks if you're ill. You rest for 5 minutes and someone says, "Must be nice to have time to sit." A quirky historical tidbit. In some places, women who were too efficient were suspected of witchcraft. How could she finish her weaving so quickly? Must be sorcery. So you can't be too slow or too fast, just exhausting amounts of adequate. And let's not forget the animals. The goat that kicks over the milk, the chickens that peck your toes, the pig that seems to wait for you to turn your back before escaping. You chase it through the mud, barefoot, swearing under your breath while the neighbours' sons laugh and shout things like, "Look, the pig's got a shadow!" They don't mean the pig. You know it. You hate it. Still, you catch the beast. You drag it home. You scrub your feet with ashes and a sigh. And then, of course, there's the baby. Sweet as she is, she clings to your skirt like a burr. You love her, but gods, you dream of silence. A moment where no one needs milk, bread, or comforting. Where no one is wailing, "Mama!" while you're elbow deep in potato skins and regret. She cries when you leave the room. She cries when you return. She cries for reasons that defy science, religion, and logic. You try not to take it personally. Your husband doesn't not help, but he's busy too, tanning hides, fixing tools, trading at market. He says he understands. He says, you work hard, but he doesn't see it. Not really. Not when the child wakes for the 3rd time in a night and you get up bleary-eyed to rock her. Not when the fire won't start and your hands are shaking from cold and fatigue. Not when you hide in the root cellar for 5 minutes just to cry where no one can hear you. This is the part of womanhood no one writes songs about. There's no glory in wiping snot with your sleeve. No epic tale in watching your bread rise just enough to avoid being called lazy. No monument built for the woman who remembered to soak beans and mend socks and stop a toddler from sticking a spoon in the fire. But you still do it, because no one else will. You dream sometimes of something different. Not castles or carriages. Just a day without tasks. A chair that doesn't creak. A bowl of stew you didn't have to cook. Maybe a second spoonful. But for now, you peel turnips while humming a lullaby, balancing a crying child on your hip, stirring the pot with your foot, and wondering when the last time was that someone said, "Thank you." You honestly can't remember. It's not that you want to be a man. You just sometimes wonder what it feels like to walk into a room and not have to prove you belong there, to speak without apology, to be invited to sit at the table rather than hover near the doorway, waiting for the right moment to ask if the bread's done rising. Because make no mistake, you're excluded. Every single day. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval women were largely barred from public life. They couldn't join guilds, speak in church, hold public office, or attend university. Unless you were cloistered in a convent or born with a crown already hovering over your baby head, society wanted you quiet, obedient, and invisible. You are not cloistered, and you are certainly not royal. You pass the guild hall every market day. Inside, men discuss prices and policies. They drink ale, scratch their beards, make decisions that affect your family, your labour, your future. You press past the open door carrying a basket of radishes and goat cheese, unnoticed, or worse, noticed just enough to be dismissed. You can't apprentice. You can't vote. You can't sign your name on anything official unless your husband lets you. You don't even have a signature, to be honest. Just a mark you make with a stick dipped in berry juice, shaped like a crooked fish. And the library? Forget it. You once peeked into the priest's chamber while scrubbing the church floor and saw the books lining the wall. Real books, not just scraps or folded prayer sheets. You asked what was inside them. "Not for you," he said without looking up. "Your soul has more to gain from silence than study." You nodded, because what else could you do? You asked your husband once if he ever wished you could learn letters. He shrugs. If you could read, you'd be distracted all day. We'd starve. You don't ask again. Quirky historical tidbit. A few women in medieval Europe were literate, and even managed to write. Abbesses, noblewomen, a few lucky merchant daughters. Some disguised their work under male pseudonyms or dictated to monks who copied their words in secret. There were cracks in the wall, but they were narrow, and most women never even saw them. You do try to learn. You memorize symbols. You listen to sermons carefully, mimicking the shape of letters with your finger in the dust. You ask your daughter to repeat new words as she hears them, turning language into a game you both pretend isn't dangerous. But knowledge is slippery, and forbidden things tend to fade unless held tightly. Sometimes, at night, you whisper old stories your grandmother told you. Stories about talking birds and clever girls who outwitted monsters by knowing just one thing more than anyone else. You hold those stories like tools, secret knives hidden in your apron pocket. The other kind of exclusion stings even more. You're not just left out of books or guilds, you're left out of the centre of things. The men speak over you at meals. At church you sit to the side, head bowed, shoulders hunched, mouth shut. At market you do the bartering, but the coin still passes through your husband's hand. Even your own opinions are suspect. If you speak too confidently, people squint. They assume someone put the idea in your head. They ask, "Where'd you hear that?" As if wisdom only flows from male mouths. Historians still argue whether this exclusion was universal, or whether some women in urban areas had more agency through trade. But you live in a village, and in your world, you know your place, because it's been shouted at you since you could walk. Still, you find ways to rebel. Small ones. You teach your daughter songs that are a little too cheeky. You dye cloth in unexpected colours just to see if anyone notices. You walk slower through town when you're alone, just to savour the feeling of choosing your own pace. And sometimes, when no one is watching, you write. Not words, not really, just lines, shapes, swirls in the mud behind the house that vanish as quickly as they appear. But they mean something to you. They remind you that your mind still turns, even if no one asks what it's turning about. You watch the boys play outside. They sword fight with sticks, shout names of knights and kings. No one tells them to be quiet, no one tells them to lower their eyes. You watch your daughter imitate them, at first, but slowly she starts staying close to you, holding dolls instead of daggers, singing quieter, sitting smaller. You don't say anything. You just feel it like a splinter under your skin. And then there are the holy days. The church fills, candles flicker, you kneel on stone that freezes your bones. The priest talks about obedience, humility, and the natural order. The men nod. The women nod too, mostly because they have to. You stare at the altar and think, what if I don't agree? You never say it out loud, but you let yourself think it. It's your quiet revolution. Because even if the world says you're not supposed to lead, speak, or learn, you're still here. You carry the firewood, you mend the cloaks, you raise the babies, bake the bread, tend the sick, feed the hungry, bury the dead. And still, you're told you don't belong in the centre of anything, but you are the centre. They just don't see it. Not yet. It begins with a glance, a flicker of disapproval from a woman in the next village over, standing stiff-backed by the bread stall. Her eyes crawl up your hemline, just a little too high for her liking, then dart to the laces of your bodice, where a bit of shift peeks out, and finally to your hair, which you tied with blue thread instead of the regulation dull brown. Nothing is said. Nothing needs to be. Because in the Middle Ages, everyone is watching how you dress. Mainstream historical fact. Sumptuary laws across medieval Europe strictly governed what women could wear, right down to fabric, colour, and even sleeve width. These weren't just fashion guidelines, they were tools of social control. You dressed not to express, but to obey. And you're always dancing a line you didn't draw. Your outer kirtle is made of coarse wool, dyed a muted green because anything brighter would signal arrogance or, worse, vanity. You stitched it yourself, spent weeks weaving the fabric, boiling the dye, shaping the neckline so it didn't choke you like a noose. But that doesn't matter to most people. All they see is what's wrong. It's always something. Your sleeves are too narrow, your apron's hemmed too clean, your head covering not pious enough. You wrap your hair in linen most days, but sometimes, just sometimes, you leave a braid exposed just to feel like a person again. Then the church bell rings and you remember, no woman is a person here. She is a role, a shadow, a cloth-wrapped vessel of humility. The priest preaches against excess. Not against the fine furs worn by the Lord's wife, mind you, but against your embroidered cuffs. Against the girl who wore red shoes once and got side-eyed for weeks. Against the unmarried woman who let her neckline slip too low during Lent and found herself at confession for the next 5 Sundays. Historians still argue whether these dress codes were enforced harshly in rural villages or simply used to shame women into self-policing. You don't need to argue, you live it. It's not just clothes either, it's your body, how you walk, how you sit, how you speak. If your voice carries, even in excitement, someone clucks their tongue. If your steps are too quick, someone assumes you're chasing something wicked. If your laugh is too loud, someone whispers the word loose. You learn to shrink without even realizing it. You adjust your posture, you lower your gaze, you round your shoulders slightly so nothing about you seems bold. You stop dancing, even in private. You stop humming while you work. You start to feel that your body is less a home and more a liability, and you begin to envy the nuns. Quirky historical tidbit. Some convents allowed women to wear simple but comfortable robes, keep their hair short and move more freely within the community than most wives ever could. It wasn't quite liberation, but it was as close as many women would ever come to autonomy. You imagine yourself in a robe, walking corridors lined with stone, not having to worry if your apron strings are tied too tight, or if your neckline offends someone's sensibilities. You imagine silence, study, sisterhood. Then your baby cries. The pig knocks over the water bucket, and your mother-in-law shouts something about your bodice being too fitted. Just like that, the fantasy vanishes. You sew new sleeves that are wider, you make your apron longer, you tie your hair with dull brown thread again. But not because you agree with the rules, because you're tired of being noticed. You just want to disappear back into the rhythm of tasks and small comforts. A day without judgment feels more luxurious than a feast. Your husband doesn't understand. He asks why you've started dressing like his grandmother. You shrug. You don't tell him it's because the priest glanced at you too long last Sunday, or because 2 women stopped talking when you entered the room wearing a blue sash. You don't tell him anything, really. He notices, but not enough to change the system. He has no idea that if your child grows up liking bright colours or walking boldly, you will be blamed. If your daughter wears flowers in her hair, and someone says she's asking for attention, it's not her who will be pulled aside, it's you. You're the one they'll call prideful, irreverent, unfit. Because you are her mirror, her frame, her first lesson in how to take up less space. You want better for her. You keep a single ribbon hidden at the bottom of your chest, the blue one, the one that made the bread seller squint. You plan to give it to your daughter one day, not for show, just to hold, to know that once you wore it and felt like yourself. You still have days where you feel defiant, where you tie your scarf just a little higher, where your stitches form small secret patterns only you can recognize, where your walk straightens for a moment even if someone might notice. And sometimes you catch your daughter watching, not judging, just watching. And you think, maybe she'll ask questions one day. Maybe she won't let herself be shrunken. Maybe she'll wear blue thread whenever she wants. You hope so, even if you don't get to. He dies quietly, not in battle, not of plague, not with ceremony or priests or final words, just quietly. Your husband lies down with a cough one evening, and by morning his skin is cool and grey and still. That's it. No goodbyes, no last requests, just a slumped figure on the straw mattress and a room full of shocked silence. You feel numb. You also feel relieved, and guilty about the relief, then angry about the guilt, then empty all over again. There's no time for grieving. There's too much to do. Mainstream historical fact. In the Middle Ages, widows occupied a strange social category. You were no longer a wife, but not exactly free. Your rights depended entirely on local laws, your husband's will, if he made one, and how much your in-laws liked you, which, let's be honest, is a gamble at best. The moment the body cools, the questions begin. Who owns the house? Who gets the tools? Who claims the animals? The church sends a man to advise you on your options. He's all vague words and scribbled scrolls and half smiles. He mentions customary law, inheritance expectations, and the needs of the estate. He never mentions you. Your husband's cousin shows up, eyes already skimming the furniture. Reckon he owed me a pair of goats, he mutters, glancing at the corner where the animals used to sleep. Your mother-in-law immediately asserts that she should remain in charge of the household. For stability, she says. You nod, not because you agree, but because you're too tired to fight. Not yet. And then there's your eldest son. He's barely 12, but legally if your husband owned anything outright, land, tools, a decent set of boots, it now belongs to the boy, not to you, to him. You become his guardian, until he turns 14, and then you answer to him. You look at him while he eats stew that night. He has no idea. He's just chewing, humming a bit between bites, happy that someone gave him the biggest chunk of carrot. You blink slowly and return to your bowl. The house doesn't feel different, but it is, because now every man who passes by knows you're alone. Vulnerable, maybe even available, they speak more softly to you, or more boldly. They linger too long at the gate. They ask if you need help mending a fence or butchering a hog. They look around the house as if checking its worth. You know what they're thinking. A widow can be claimed. A quirky historical tidbit. In some villages, the local lord had the legal right to decide whom a widow could marry. In exchange for the privilege of staying on her late husband's land, she might be paired off with someone she barely knew, or didn't want. You're not ready to remarry. You're not even sure you ever want to. But you also can't afford to live as a burden. You do the math. You don't own the roof over your head. You don't have legal guardianship of your own children, not in a way that grants control. You don't control your income because your husband's tanner's tools were reclaimed by his cousin within the week. You have your hands, your sewing needle, your root cellar, and a jar of dried herbs that some people still trust you to brew without suspicion. It's not enough. So you start asking around, quietly, carefully, not about men, about options. You hear of a widow in the next village who rents her attic to travelling weavers, another who sells spiced ale during festivals, another still who joined the lay sisters at a convent, scrubbing floors in exchange for board and quiet. Historians still argue whether widows had more independence or simply traded one kind of dependence for another. From where you sit, knees sore, soup boiling, children asleep, it feels like both. You try to claim some space. You move your husband's boots out of the doorway. You rearrange the firewood. You speak louder at the market. You barter with confidence. People notice, not always in a good way. Your mother-in-law tuts. Your neighbour frowns. The priest gives a sermon about the dangers of unguarded tongues and women who forget their station. You scrub your pots harder that evening, smiling bitterly. And then, 3 weeks after the funeral, a man appears at your gate. Not a stranger, just someone you didn't think would be bold enough. "I could take care of things here," he says. "You've got mouths to feed. I've got strong hands." You thank him, politely, firmly, politely. You do not invite him in. Later you sit at the edge of your bed. The room is cold. The wind whistles through the shutter. You wrap your shawl tighter and stare at the ceiling, wondering what's worse, being ignored or being noticed like this. You consider your daughter, your son, the ache in your knees, the balance of flour in the bin, the goats that didn't actually belong to anyone's cousin, and you think, I have made it this far. You might not own the land. You might not wear the keys at your waist like a noblewoman, but you're still here, still deciding, even if the world insists you can't. 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 World insists you